Utah's latest recruiting class will keep them among the top teams in the Big 12 for years to come.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. Today's episode of Locked On Utes brought to you by Game Time. You can download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College, all caps, no spaces, for $20 off your first purchase. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined by Matt Patton of Utah Rivals. And Matt, we're going to talk about this 2025 recruiting class, and we'll close at the end with talk about some of the success that Junior Tafuna and Karene Reid are currently having at the Senior Bowl. But first, just going back to just this recruiting class as a whole, I do believe this is a class that will keep Utah in the running in the Big 12 for years to come. I think they got a little bit of everything. I like the defensive line talent they were able to add, particularly at defensive tackle. I think they got a couple of 4-stars that we're going to talk about in a moment that intrigue and excite me. There's players on both sides of the ball that I expect to be playmakers, players that fit the physical mold that have had a lot of success here at Utah. Morgan Scalley, Sharif Shaw, Jim Harding, all these guys. A history, and another Colton Swan, because there's some good linebackers in this class too. This group has a lot of upside, and Utah, if they want to, can still be a contender year in year out in the Big 12. Need to continue to be successful in the transfer portal, but bread and butter still has to be recruiting. And this is another class that I think is going to play big dividends when we look back on it years from now.
Yeah, it's kind of a class that's just kind of snuck in because of the amount of attention that's being given to the transfer portal. But there's a lot of guys in here that I think are going to surprise Ute fans and the rest of the nation. There's some guys that are real difference makers, and a lot of them are going to be able to come in for spring ball. So I think there's a good chance that you'll see some of them have an immediate impact on this team.
I think so too. So now what we're going to do is we're going to talk about these players. We are going to go back and forth and talk about our favorite players that Utah added. We're going to take turns drafting each of these guys. Matt, I thought about letting you have the first pick, but I really want to talk about this one guy, so I decided to give it to myself and be a bad host. So the first guy that I want to talk about, I think is a surprise because he's not the highest ranked guy in this class. But it's Wyatt Becker. I want to talk about the quarterback that Utah landed from Sierra Canyon. He's a top 35 QB in the country who he had offers from Georgia, Florida State, Penn State, A&M, and Oregon. This is a guy who Moose Bingham, a long time one of the top recruiting guys and who does a great job covering high school football in the state, have him on all the time. He has talked frequently about how special he thinks that Becker is. And I see the same thing when I turn on the tape. And it's not even just the tape, right? I mean, you see it in the stats. Threw for over 1,800 yards. And has over 60% completion percentage, over 350 yards rushing. This guy's a gamer. He can make all the throws. He's incredibly impressive with his footwork too. To me, if you're saying who is Utah's next starter after Devin Dampier, right now, I would say I think it will be Wyatt Becker.
I love that you chose Wyatt Becker because I also had a quarterback. So if we're drafting, this is perfect. So okay. Jamarian Ficklin. I love his highlights. I love this guy. And he seems to fit exactly what Utah is trying to do. And, he doesn't have the greatest recruiting profile, I guess is the best way to put it. He's got Army, Florida A&M, Grambling State, those types of teams. But I look at what he's done his senior season. This guy, he threw for 30 touchdowns to only 4 interceptions, and he's a runner. He ran for 687 yards and 13 touchdowns. He had 3 games over 100 yards rushing. So that's a guy that I think, if you're looking at the mold of what they're trying to do and somebody that could step in pretty quickly in the next couple of years, I like what Ficklin shows.
Yeah, I love it. We both chose quarterbacks, as you mentioned, too. So both looking to see which of these guys are going to rise through the ranks. I really like Ficklin, like you mentioned, with the profile. And just I think he does have that ability to be a star at this university. So will be interesting to see if him or Becker, which of the guys that each of us mentioned are going to be the first to kind of pop up. Next, I am going to go with someone who's a lot less under the radar in this recruiting class. Well, I guess Becker's not super under the radar at the time he was their top quarterback yet. And I still think overall he was in rankings, but him and Ficklin both 3 stars. I'm going to go with J.J. Buchanan, 6'4", 200-pound, one of the top high school football players just out of the state of Nevada, according to 24/7. sports. This is a guy who had over 1,000 receiving yards, 11 touchdowns. And he's a dual threat. He's one of the best athletes in the entire 2025 recruiting class. 61 tackles, 2 sacks, interception, and 2 pass breakups. Actually said recently that he might end up starting at receiver first for Utah, but either side of the ball this guy plays on, I'm a big fan. I am intrigued most as a receiver, just 6'4", 200 pounds. That catch radius, I think, could pose big problems, but I love that Utah is bringing in Buchanan. If you're saying who has the lowest floor of anyone in Utah's class, it's Buchanan and maybe one other guy that we'll see if I get the chance to talk about or if you're going to take instead, Matt. But what do you think of Buchanan as a player?
Oh, I love Buchanan. I think the exact same thing you're saying. And this is one of those guys that I'm talking about, that because there's been so much attention on the transfer portal, I don't think people realize, when I say people, I should say Ute fans. I'm not hearing Ute fans talking much about him. And I know when they've gotten other 4-star recruits, it's been a big deal. And I'm like, this is a guy, he can play so many positions. He can go receiver, tight end, safety, maybe linebacker in the future, depending on, how he bulks up. I mean, this is a guy that's going to be, I don't know. I mean, maybe even be able to play both ways on occasion. And I think that's something you can't, even put money on.
Big 12's next Travis Hunter? Nah.
Yeah. That'd be nice.
That would be incredible. And I think there is a world where he could do that as a safety, potentially, maybe even as a linebacker. We'll see. Heck, 6'4", maybe if you want to put on more weight to it, potentially a defensive end or just a good pass rusher. That's the very least as of right now. When
I can put him in so many spots.
Yeah, lots of versatility, which we love. Matt, who's the next guy you're rolling with?
Well, JJ Buchanan was who I wanted to take next. And so, but Racine Guillory, I love speed. And he's got it, and he has shown year after year. This is one of those guys that has had big rushing seasons pretty much his entire high school career. This wasn't just like a 1 year he just kind of blossomed. I mean, he's been putting up big numbers for several years, and he's just pure speed. And he seems to have a little bit more shiftiness to his game than some of these other guys that Utah had brought in with the speed. And so I'd really like to see how that translates to the college level. But Racine Guillory really excites me at the running back position.
Yeah, he's got the speed. And look, speed can be maybe not everything, but dang near close in today's world of college football, right? When you're talking about a guy who is that 4-star, has that elite talent, those intangibles, I think it's incredibly exciting what he's going to bring, right? The fact that he chose Utah over Ole Miss, held offers from the Notre Dames, Ohio States, Georgia. You name it. Overall, number 30th running back in the nation, right? You mentioned some of the stats, right? Like nearly 1,300 yards rushing, 24 touchdowns, 8 yards per carry. This is a guy like, okay, if you're going to say which freshman back is most likely to contribute, I think you got to say Guillory. I know he's 5'10", so he's a little undersized, but the speed, the intangibles there, I'm really excited and optimistic about what Guillory can do in 2020. We're just getting rolling with our draft here. Only 2 guys off the board. Each going to take 3 more. And we'll talk about some honorable mentions too from this really strong recruiting class that Utah's been able to bring on. We're going to keep this moving in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by our great friends at Game Time. Attending the NFL playoff games is an experience like no other. The energy, the excitement, and the connection with other fans are unmatched. I remember the thrill of seeing my favorite team clinch a playoff win live. It's a memory I'll never forget. This year, Game Time makes it even easier to create those unforgettable moments with their new feature, Game Picks. Filters out the fluff to show you only the best deals on great seats so you can focus on what matters, being there. I use Game Picks to grab tickets for an upcoming playoff game, and it could not have been easier. I found super deals that gave me incredible value on the amazing seats. I could even preview the view from my spot before buying. The all-in price is a game changer. No surprise fees at checkout. Plus, knowing my tickets are backed by Game Time guarantee just gives me that peace of mind. I also love things like the seat view. I know exactly what kind of a deal I'm getting before I make my purchase. Low price guarantee is a game changer. They event cancellation, job protection, loss. So many amazing features with Game Time. And it's not even just sports tickets, concert, comedy, and theater events near you as well, available on Game Time. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON, college all caps, no spaces, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, Matt, keeping our draft rolling. You just made a great selection in Hillary, and I am going to take this next guy on the board. Wasn't sure who was going to reach me at this point. I'm going to take the best player that Utah is adding from the state of Utah. That's Cyrus Polu. This is a guy, the Desert Hills product from St. George, Utah. He had several Big Ten offers, but he chose Utah, which everyone should be really fired up about. Had 46 tackles, 2 interceptions, go along with a forced fumble. This is a name that we've been monitoring for a while in the state. He was a game changer down with Desert Hill, and I think that he is going to be a guy. He'll roll in right away. If you were telling me, Barton, Hall, DeMooney, those are your top 3 linebackers. One of those guys gets hurt and we see Polo on the field, that wouldn't shock me. I think he's that type of a player. I'm excited to see him in this defense. I think Colton Swan got a dude in Polo.
He's one of those guys that I think Kyle Whittingham was talking about when they were talking about how usually they have to wait for these freshmen to bulk up, to have the size that they're going to need to get on the field. And he's one of those guys that, like you said, he should be able to contribute right away. He's got that size, and that's a really exciting thing. So now I'm a little disappointed you took him because he was my next one up, but I've got an even better one that I think. Well, I shouldn't say an even better, but just one I'm really excited about.
Who are you rolling with?
All right, I'm going to just throw out a few things before I say the name. All right, here's some offers for this guy. Let's go with Oklahoma, Oregon, Tennessee, Texas A&M, USC, Washington, West Virginia. From the state of Nevada, Las Vegas linebacker Christian Thatcher.
That's a good pick.
Yeah, really excited about Thatcher. This guy, 116 tackles in his senior season, 13 tackles for a loss. He was all over the field. He had a couple fumble recoveries, an interception. He does it all. This is one of those guys that when I see him, he reminds me of some of those great linebackers that has rolled through this Utah program. Mm-hmm. And it just seems like he's going to have that motor. He's a high motor type guy that can get all over the field, a little bit like a Karene Reid. And so, when they need to replace a Reid, now that he's off to go to the NFL, I think a Christian Thatcher is a guy that can step in pretty quick. He might need a little time to bulk up, but he should have that time as long as people stay healthy. So he's one that I'm excited about.
Nevada's all-time leading tackler, which is just insane.
Point. Yeah, all-time.
443, 116 last year. 3 forced fumbles, too, so he's a thumper. Guy gets it done out here, too. As much as I was talking about Polo, if you said, hey, Thatcher's actually the guy is that linebacker for, wouldn't be surprised at all. Thatcher was a 4-star, actually dropped a lot. That was a while ago. He just dipped under one. So, and I think he's a guy. I mean, he's a top 5 player in the state of Nevada, according to 24/7 Sports. Also, if you guys haven't taken this away yet from our top 3 draft, from our draft, we've only done 3 picks each so far here. Keep in mind, or just not keep in mind, but just take notice of how many of these guys we're talking about that have offers from other Big Ten and SEC schools and come to Utah. I don't feel like we should be overly disappointed when Utah loses out to the Big Ten and the SEC, because with NIL being what it is, with the exposure and just the difference there, you're going to lose a lot. But the fact that Utah is still landing some of those guys, they're in the running for these guys. That's an encouragement about the position this Utah football program is still in, and still lead the Big 12 with the most players currently drafted to the NFL, which is something incredibly exciting that Utah has, and is an awesome feather in their just cap and just success that they've been able to do. So when you're talking about Thatcher, that was a guy I definitely wanted to add. He was going to be one of my my next ones I talk about too. And thankfully when you're talking about Utah guys, it's a riches of recruits they have. I'm going to go with Carson Kafusi next. And I know he's coming off the injury from Skyline High School, but look, 6'4", 252 pounds. This is a guy who I feel like has a chance to be the next interior disruptor along the defensive line. He was ranked the number 6 prospect by 24/7 Sports in the state of Utah. Another guy did have a Big Ten offer in Washington, then BYU in Arizona, and still a top 80 defensive lineman to 26 tackles, 3 of those for loss, a sack, and a forced fumble with the Eagles a year ago at Skyline. He has all the physical tools and mold that Coach Powell and Ellis, I feel like, will help transform. I think it's going to be a little bit till we hear his name, might be a year, maybe even 2, but I do expect Kafusi to at some point be a starter and a key contributor on a Morgan Scally defense.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. He seems like that type of a player. He does need to bulk up. He's not one of those guys, that let's say like an Asiata who is 330 or a semi I can't even say his name, Taulanga from Mater Day. Yeah. I mean, he doesn't quite have that size yet. And yet you kind of look at the offer sheet that he has, and it shows people know they know what type of talent he has.
Mm-hmm. Yes, they do. So I'm excited to see what he can do. Who are you rolling with your next pick, Matt?
Well, this one, it may not be the most popular pick, but when I look back at Utah football, it's all about the three phases of the game. And when they have a good kicker, like a Louis Sakota, a Matt Gay, good things seem to happen. A good kicker can bail you out of a lot of problems. And if you have a kicker that can hit a 60-yard field goal, that's going to put you in some really nice situations and be able to get you points where you otherwise wouldn't have. So I'm going to go with Dylan Curtis.
Okay.
He's just got a cannon for a leg. And the fact that he can also punt is a nice thing to have. If you're, if they're having some struggles with punters, which even their punting game really hasn't been as strong the last few years. So I know it's not an exciting pick to go with special teams, but I'm going with a kicker. I think Dylan Curtis is going to be a high impact player. He's going to impact the team immediately and be able to give them some points where they've been missing a lot lately.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That is 1,000% a good pick because McNair is a guy. He's got a chance to be a starter at this team next year with his production, what he was able to do at Murray. He's got a leg, and that is something Utah needs. I'm excited to see what he can do, Curtis, because I think he is going to be an absolute monster for this team. So down to our final pick, and we'll definitely have some honorable mentions too after, because this class is full of guys that are worth discussing.
There are,
and there's a lot of guys could go with here. But honestly, the other guys I'm looking at, I don't want to not mention is Daniel Bray. I mean, he's another back. We already talked about Guillory a little bit and what he can provide, but Bray's a guy committed to SMU, but then flipped to Utah at over 1,300 yards last year, over 20 rushing touchdowns. Like the speed and the ability that he's going to bring and play with this Utah team too. I think Bray is a guy who has a really good chance to be a strong contributor for this Utah team. Not the biggest, but got the heart. So I'm going to roll with Bray being a dude.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick. And I've honestly, as I'm trying to figure out who I want for my fifth one, I'm bouncing all over the place. And I'm looking at running backs. And I just think, and honestly, it's hard to say who's going to end up stepping up. And a lot of times we'll see this with freshmen where there's one guy that everyone's like, oh, it's going to be this guy. And out of nowhere, somebody else rises up. And so I like that Utah's brought in a good group to choose from to let them compete for it. And then also have some transfers that are going to give them that depth and, should probably be starting. But these guys, if they go out and if they can be there at spring ball, they can get into the rotation.
They can. They absolutely can. So you got the final pick in the draft. Where are you going, Matt?
Well, I've been jumping all over the place. I'm going to go with Drew Clemens.
Oh, I like it. Tight end.
Tight end. I know it's a different offense now, and it'll be interesting to see how the tight ends are used. But when I've looked at some of the past offenses that were, I think, was it Syracuse? I think it's Syracuse. The second highest receiver there was a tight end. And so I'd have to go verify that. But anyway, it just shows that tight end can still be used in this offense. And so I think it'll be really interesting to see if Clemens can be the next great tight end.
Mm-hmm. I think he's got a shot. You mentioned the physical profile. I really like what he brings. And I like what a lot of these guys bring. I mean, we didn't get to talk about Darren Mays. All of the defensive linemen that Utah's had, especially those D tackles, I think they're going to be guys too. Jason Stokes is another guy that gets me fired up. Nick Hallock, the offensive tackle from Bingham. Shelton Fuller, the safety. He would have been my first one, just missed it. Shelton Fuller, the athlete, 6 foot. I think he is a guy who can do a lot of different things for this Utah squad. But look, it's a 42nd ranked class, 38 ranked composite, 35 transfers. One thing that has consistently been a case with Utah is some of the recruits they bring in are part of their NFL success. Like coincidence, I think not. I think several of these guys have a chance to be drafted and hear their names called on Sunday in the very near future. But like we said, Matt, this class has got some difference makers in it, and I think we are going to see a large. Now, it doesn't mean everyone's going to work. The 23 class, we those 3 running backs are no longer with Utah. Like, not every recruit always pans out, but there is so much depth in this class. You're throwing so many darts at the board. Basically, if you're Utah, several of them are going to hit.
Yeah, and I think as much as, I personally get excited about the transfer portal and the players that get brought in, but you look at how many of these guys came last year to Utah and how many are already leaving again. It kind of seems like you'll get a few that'll stick around or that will, make their way to the NFL. But these guys that are entering the transfer portal, in most cases, are one and dones. They come and they go. You look at these guys that have 4 schools under their history. I mean, these recruits are so important still, very important.
Mm-hmm. These guys will try to become the next Junior Tafuna and Karene Reid. Speaking of Junior Tafuna and Karene Reid, those are 2 guys at the Reese's Senior Bowl that are shining right now. Reese's Senior Bowl, you bring the top seniors in the country all coming together, opportunity to perform among the scouts. And this year's Senior Bowl has got a ton of fantastic players. It was awesome to see both Reid and Tafuna get a little later invites than early, but both of them making waves. I mean, Junior was getting after it in the one-on-one drills. He's a guy who's got such a prolific physical profile. I mean, you look at his numbers over the course of Utah, the 6'3", 308-pound defensive lineman, actually measured at 6'2". I guess they did their exact measurements today, but a 4-year contributor, just a monster at stopping the run for this Utah team. I think Tafuna is going to be a guy at the next level. I don't see how he doesn't get drafted personally. I think he's too good of a leader, locker room presence, and is a guy who can play on first and second down for sure. And on third down, he can still provide some value with the bull rush. And I always feel like that 4.5 sack guy from his freshman year is still in there. So I'm excited to see what Tafuna can do on the next level.
I just think that Utah needed a run stopper, and that's what he was often called on to do. And that's probably why he didn't have quite the number of sacks like he did in the freshman year. He plugged the holes, and he did it very, very well. And when he was out of the game, it was very noticeable.
Yeah.
The rushing, that's where all of a sudden, Ute fans are like, wait, Utah doesn't give up 40-yard rushes. And it's like, oh, well, yeah, Junior Tafuna's out, and so he's a big part of that. And if you haven't gone on Twitter yet and seen the clip of Tafuna against, it was USC Jonah Monheim, you got to go check that out. I mean, whoa, I'm sure he elevated his stock, and then poor Jonah Monheim, it's like, well, I don't know who's going to draft that guy, because I'm pretty sure Junior Tafuna pushed him back about 20 yards.
He did.
So
it was, thankfully for Monheim, it was just one rep, because it was a dang bad on one. That's for sure.
Yeah. So go check that out if you haven't already.
Yeah, and as good as Junior Tafuna is, I think Karene Reid is right there with him as the best. I think right now, maybe I'm missing someone off the top of my head, Matt. If you said JT right now, who's going to be the first you drafted, I think it is going to be Karene Reid. The size is something that's probably a little bit of a concern, as he is only 6 foot, but I mean, he's just a baller. Every time he's on the field, he was right there. He's Utah's 3rd leader in tackles, and he missed a ton of games this past season, right? All 4 years had over 40 tackles, including his most being 72 and 22 when he was fully healthy there too. That's where he had 5 sacks too. Just the versatility. He can drop in coverage. He can do it all. Right place, right time. A really smart player, and a guy that is already getting the opportunity at the Senior Bowl to impress. And I expect to really impress at the NFL level too.
Yeah, and like you said, it's sad to me. I thought that this season Utah would have like 10 guys going to the NFL. A guy like Brant Keithy, Cam Rising, I thought they might have some opportunity to raise their stock. Keithy still might.
He might.
I'm interested to see what NFL teams do with Keithy, and if there's anybody that could beat Karene Reid, it could be Keithy, just because they have to see that potential. They have to see what he was able to accomplish when he's healthy. But the health could be a concern, and it could, pull him back. But yeah, Karene Reid, that versatility, and it doesn't seem like in the NFL anymore, especially with these slot receivers becoming, such a big part of the game, that it doesn't seem like they necessarily need the bigger guys. They just need guys that can stick with those slot receivers. And so Karene Reid does a great job with that. So I agree. He should probably be the first one off the board unless there's some kind of a surprise.
Yep. I think he's got a great shot, and he's not going to be the only Utah player drafted. There will be time to talk about that more on the future. I actually did an episode on that in the past, but a lot of talent at the Senior Bowl and a lot of talent coming up through the recruiting rankings to tie this one up full circle. Matt, always appreciate you stopping by. People want to check out more of your work. Where they need to head over to?
Yep. Go check it out. Check me out on Twitter at Patton Matt, or you can head over to utah.rivals.com.
Thanks, Matt.
Yep. Good to be on the show.
Always great having you on. That's going to do it for today's Locked On Utes. We'll be back with you tomorrow talking the latest in Utah football and Utah recruiting news.